Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our regular event Thursday lecture. Today, we are going to talk about essay writing, and you will join essay writing workshop with our guest, Justin van Dyke. And as far as you know, application essay is one of the ways for international students which we use to make an effective and memorable personal statement when applying to US universities. However, writing the essay that would fulfill its role and perfectly demonstrate personality of the applicant can be very challenging. So today you will get to know all the information about essay writing and find out about common admission essays, mistakes, and writing tips. I would also like to introduce my guest today, and this is Justin van Dyke. And Justin, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Justin, and I'm an outreach officer for New York University, their campus in Abu Dhabi. And it's my responsibility to meet with students across Europe and help them understand the prospect of this university, the application process, and of course, things like the essay, which I'll be talking about today. So if you can go ahead and bring up the slide deck, I'll go ahead and get started. Great, thanks. So you can see here, I'll post my contact information at the end of the presentation as well. But before I dive in, I just want to, for one, to let you know that we understand that this is a really difficult time for many Ukrainian students now, and we, in our admissions process, we'll do everything that we can to accommodate you. We have a number of changes we've made to the application, the process this year, including that we are test optional. So if you don't have access to a test, that's completely fine. It's not required. We also do not require more than one letter of recommendation. We just need one letter, and it can come from anyone in your life who is a person of importance. So that can be a teacher or a coach, but we only require one. I won't go into too much detail on that, but just want to let you know that if you're interested in applying to NYU, I'm your resource, I'm your contact. I'm happy to help you through this process. It's not something you have to go through alone. I'm more than happy to help with all of the aspects and not just the essay writing. So to start off, I want to give you a little bit of an idea of this institution, of New York University, and maybe address one thing that's kind of confusing, that I said New York and Abu Dhabi. So you may be asking yourselves, well, where is it? Is it in New York or Abu Dhabi? And actually, I'll make it even more confusing before answering that question by saying that it's in 3 different cities. New York University is this global network university, and when students apply, they're asked to consider 3 different campuses, one in New York, one in Abu Dhabi, and one in Shanghai. So it's the same university and same degree, but each campus is a little bit different in terms of what it has to offer. The Abu Dhabi campus is kind of like an international honors program. We have students from over 120 different countries, with no majority from any one part of the world. We also have generous scholarships and meet full demonstrated need. And we also have give students the opportunity to study in 3 or 4 countries by the time they graduate. So if this is a kind of program you're interested in, please feel free to contact me, and I can give you a bit more information about how this university works. So I want to go ahead and just dive in and talk about what this Common App essay is, and look directly at what they're asking for. So this is a piece of writing that should distinguish you clearly and concisely, and do this in no more than 650 words. This is a very different kind of essay, a different kind of piece of writing than most of you have probably been asked to write before. And I think it's, for me, I think it's almost easier to tell you what this essay is not than to tell you what this essay is. So this personal essay is not an academic essay, so it should not be a piece of writing that you would do for your biology class or your history class. It's also not a CV, so it shouldn't be just a listing of your accomplishments and things that we already know. Really, it should not be anything that we can already find other places in your application. So it should tell us something new, something that we wouldn't be able to know about you just from, looking at your grades and seeing the list of honors or extracurricular activities. So it should give us new information. And it should also set you apart. This is the element in the application that can really serve to distinguish you from other students, especially if you're applying to more competitive universities. I always tell students to imagine that you have a doppelganger twin, someone who got the exact same grades as you, someone who did the exact same activities, and then imagine that you're both applying to the same university. What are you going to say to them, to admissions? What are you going to tell admissions to show us how you're different from this person, how you stand out from them? So it's important to do that. Also, obviously, this is a great chance to show off your ability to express yourself in English, so your English writing skills. So do make sure that your writing is, clear and polished. It can be, a complex piece of writing. It doesn't have to be simple, but it should not be overcomplicated. So it should be easy to follow. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go on in the presentation. Also, it may sound obvious, but this should be interesting. This should be exciting and engaging. You want to really get the attention of the reader and really pull in their attention and make them get an idea of who you are. It really is kind of like creating this 3D portrait. I see there's a question that popped up of whether it can be a scientific or a sociological essay. In most cases, we're really not looking for this. If there's something scientific that inspires you, or something in your studies that really kind of shapes how you see the world or the things that you're passionate about, you can feel free to talk about academics. But the point is not to write an essay specifically about research or something that you've done. At the end of the day, it really should be about you. And you can get creative. It can be something that's written in a different kind of style. If you're a funny person, by all means, it can be a funny essay. If you have a serious story to tell, it can be that as well. But just remember that it should be in your voice. I know this is really tired advice that you've probably gotten your whole life. I almost hate to repeat it, but the best advice is to be yourself. It's really the only person you can be. It's who we want to see. So make sure that your voice is coming through and that you're not using, maybe big words that you're not familiar with or you don't know the exact meaning of, because those things will come through. So make sure that you're using your voice. And finally, it should also be a combination of both a good topic and a great approach. So not only, the subject of what you're talking about, but how you talk about it. You can talk about a really exciting thing in a very boring way, or you can talk about something that seems kind of normal in an exciting way. So it should be both things here. And I'll give you some examples to do that. But for the next part of the presentation, I'm going to give you 4 steps. And these are really the 4 exact steps to creating the perfect essay from your part. So these are, again, they're only 4 steps, but it's a bigger process than a lot of students realize. This is definitely not an essay that you just sit down to write before the application is due the next day. It definitely takes some reflection and some editing and revising. So make sure to give yourself some time and go through these steps before you just send in your application. So the very first place to start is to just explore the prompts, explore the questions that you have the option to answer. The Common App has 6 different options, and you can choose from one of these to be the topic of your essay. And some students will read this list and say, okay, I want to answer number 3, that's it, and write my essay and submit it. That's fine. Sometimes that works out well. But also sometimes you can be closing yourself out by not thinking of all of them. So really what I encourage students to do is look at those 6 prompts and then ask yourself, okay, if I had to write an essay on this question, what would I write about? How would I talk about this? What would be the topic? How would it work out? And just jot down a few ideas. And then once you have your ideas, actually go and ask yourself, which one of these ideas is going to be the most unique and personal to me? Which one is really going to show off the things that I want admissions to know about me? So sometimes it's not the most obvious choice. Sometimes you have to reflect a little bit more to say, think which one will be a good fit. So definitely give yourself the time to reflect on all of those prompts and figure out which ones are really standing out to you. Then the second step will be to narrow down your options. So you can pick 2 or maybe even 3 that you really like, and go ahead and write an outline or an introduction for each of them. So you can write the outline and say, okay, if I were to choose this one, I would address it in this way. Here's how I would start. This is the middle part of it, and my conclusion, and kind of see the structure of how you would make your essay. Or if you're just feeling particularly inspired, you can go ahead and write that first introductory paragraph. If you're starting to tell a story and it's already in your mind, you can go ahead and write it. And then come back to these same questions before. Look at how these essays are developing and say, which one of these is the most unique and personal to me? Which one is really showing off the things that I want admissions to know about me? All of this extra stuff that they might not know from reading the other parts of the application. And then also figure out which details you should be focusing on. There are quite a few of the essay questions that have kind of multi-part answers or multi-part questions. So it's important that you address all of those things. Then once you've done this, hopefully you can pick one that you feel is really going to be the star, the one that really works for you, and go ahead and write a full draft of it. Write turn that outline into a full draft, and then keep revisiting these same questions. You want to make sure that your essay is doing what it's supposed to do. Is it unique? Is it personal? Is it really making these unique things to you stand out to admissions? And just make sure that it's still, really accomplishing those things. And then also round back and ask yourself if you're actually answering the question. I know a lot of times when we start to tell stories or to write an essay and we get really excited about things, sometimes we just kind of get completely off track or stray from the subject of the test, which is from the subject of the essay, which is fine. That naturally happens, but you want to make sure that you are still answering the question. And I would say it's also important to note that the point of this exercise, the point of this essay, is not to have like the very best answer anyone has ever written to this essay before. That's not the idea. We don't expect it to for that to be the goal. The prompt is really just kind of a touchstone. It's the thing to give you a way to have this journey and to explain these things. So like they say that travel, I'm going to completely ruin this aphorism, but that getting there is sometimes as important as the destination. So allowing yourself to have this personal journey and to explore these things is really important. So don't focus too much on having the best answer, but focus more on just letting this prompt be the thing that lets you lead this discussion and tell your story. You also want to round back and make sure that it's clear and well organized and interesting to read. I mentioned at the beginning that you can have a complex essay, but you don't want it to be overcomplicated. So it doesn't have to be simple, but you want to make sure that the person who's reading it can understand it on the first read through. In most cases, admissions will read the essay once, maybe 1.5 times if they have time. So this is your one chance to impress admissions and tell your story. So you want to make sure that it's not too difficult to follow. An example I've been using is a few years ago, I read an essay that a student wrote in the form of a computer program. And I am not a computer science person at all. I'm more of an arts and humanities person. I know next to nothing about programming, but I could still read his essay. I could still understand what he was saying and where it was going. So that's really the key. You can do something interesting and surprising and technical, but make sure that it's still something that is understandable by everyone who's reading it. Which brings me to the final step in the process, which is getting feedback. So edit, revise, rewrite. So go ahead and share your draft with a teacher or a parent or a best friend, and actually have them ask these same questions over again. Is this unique and interesting? Is it memorable? Is it exciting? Does it draw you in? Also, you want to ask them, since they're important people in your life, do they agree that this is unique and personal to you? Like, for example, if they saw this essay and they started reading it and your name wasn't on it, they didn't know it was from you, ask them, would you still know this is about me if my name wasn't on it? Does my personality come through? You want to really make sure that's the case. And also the reverse, you can ask them, what if you didn't know me and you started reading this essay? What are the kinds of things that you would learn about the person who wrote this? So this is a really key step to get this feedback and have this outside perspective. You also, of course, want to make sure that it's polished and clear and that it's showing off your best ability to write in English. That goes without saying. There should be no typos or grammatical errors. But I would also encourage you not to go too far the other way. As I mentioned at the beginning, maybe avoid using a thesaurus or big words that you don't usually use, and that it will kind of come off in a voice that's not as natural to your own. So remember, it should be your voice, not your best friend who's really good at writing in English, or a parent, or your favorite author. It shouldn't be in any of those other styles. It should really come through in your voice. So let it be authentic. Finally, also ask them if there are any gaps. When we tell stories about things that happen to us, they're in our minds, they're in our memories. So a lot of times when we write them, we may leave things out that are obvious to us because it happened to us. So do make sure to ask them if there's anything that doesn't click or doesn't make sense. I know also sometimes students will, when they're going through and editing and revising, they'll read it backwards. So start at the last paragraph and then kind of go through from the bottom to the top. This can kind of rewire your brain to read it in a different way and kind of notice if there's something that really doesn't flow well. But it's really key to take this time and get this feedback and incorporate it all into your final draft. So those are the 4 steps. Again, I know it feels like a lot to do, but I promise you it's not a difficult thing, especially if you have resources like EducationUSA and myself to help you out with this. And I think not only is it not difficult, I think it's also a really fulfilling exercise to kind of learn more about yourself, to do this kind of navel gazing and think, who I am, who am I, what's important to me, how do I see the world, what am I passionate about? And it also teaches you how to tell your story. This is something that you'll be doing for the rest of your life, telling other people, who you are and being able to communicate. This is a really important skill. So this is definitely something that you should take the time to go through and not rush. So for the next part of the workshop, I want to look at a few of the prompts. So you can see here, I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are the 6 prompts that are available to choose from in the Common App. Some universities will have a different set of prompts, but I think they're all pretty typical prompts that universities ask. So, just looking at these can be helpful to reflect a little bit. You'll also note that there's a 7th choice, which is really an essay of your own choice, which is perfectly fine if you want to do that. But you should definitely make sure that if you choose an essay of your own topic, that it should do all of the things that I've just talked about, showing off these personal qualities and, again, not being an academic essay. Definitely, please don't resubmit something that you just wrote for your history class or some other application. You should really take the time to sit down and write something. Again, if you've already written something that's kind of similar, that you feel it accomplishes that goal, by all means you can submit it. But I still encourage you to reflect a little bit and make sure that it's accomplishing all of these things. So for the last part of this presentation, I want to actually share a few examples with you. So we'll look at 3 of the prompts, and I have some kind of hypothetical responses for how students could respond. Some of these are real examples. Some of these are made up examples. None of them are 100% good. None of them are 100% bad. But they're really just kind of archetypes to illustrate the kinds of responses that sometimes students give to these essays. So for the first one, we have some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful, they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. So for example A, we have a student who said, I am of this nationality, which means I speak this unique way, and I have these unique traditions and eat these unique foods that I bet you've never heard of. So, technically this is answering the question. The student is talking about a background or an identity. But the problem we start to see here is that the student is giving us a story about their entire country and not really specifically themselves. So it, risks turning into a kind of a Wikipedia article where, we'll read it and we'll learn about something that's unique and important to the student. But it's really, arguably unique and important to all of the other students who are applying from that country. So it's really important to avoid a trap like this where you end up talking more about other things than about yourself. So if you do talk about your country or your nationality, make sure that you dive in and make it a little bit more specific to you, why it's so meaningful to you. I also see this happen when students will, talk about, maybe they'll write an essay about their grandmother who was really inspiring for them and did all of these great things. And again, we learn that this person was really important to you, but after we finish reading the essay, we know a lot about your grandmother, but not very much about you. So do make sure that it is personal at the end of the day. For example B, we have a student who says, I went to study business, I excel in these classes, and I won these awards. Great, fantastic. These are things that we want to know, but this isn't the place to tell us that. We'll see this in your list of extracurricular activities, also and the grades that you've gotten in these classes. So we already have this information. Don't waste the opportunity here to tell us a little bit more. This doesn't mean that the student couldn't write about business. If there was a personal connection or they talked about some kind of experience they had that inspired them to want to study business and pursue this, and it's about them and not, their classroom accomplishments, by all means, you can do that. But here, this is a good example of talking about the subject and the approach. Here, talking about business in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. But if a student's writing a CV instead of an essay, then that's really not going to serve the student. So make sure to keep that in mind. Finally, for example, C, we have a student who wrote, I don't just listen to music, I'm an avid musicologist. Let me tell you about the opera of my life, and in particular, the last chapter, my jazz stage. So you can see here in this intro, I'm already getting drawn in. I want to know what the jazz stage is. I'm kind of interested to see how this comparison goes on and how music plays a role in the student's life. So feel free to use these kinds of literary devices and to be engaging in this way. We want it to be interesting and creative and really to draw us in, to have that hook at the beginning. That's a really great technique. So feel free to use these kinds of techniques. And this is a great start. But again, this also could be a bad essay if the student goes on and starts talking about all of these different areas. And at the end of the, I'm halfway through the essay and I'm like, wait, are we in the punk rock phase? Are we back in the opera phase? I'm lost. I don't know where we're going. So if you make it overwrought, overcomplicated, then that won't necessarily function. So it's all about that balance. Do be creative, but don't do it to a point where we're having difficulty following you in that respect. For example 2, this is kind of the failure question. So we ask, the lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you? And what did you learn from the experience? This is one of those questions that I mentioned before that kind of has two parts. So we ask, okay, recount a time when you faced a challenge. That's the first part. And then we want to hear, how did it affect you? And what did you learn from the experience? So of course, it's important that you're answering both questions here. And also that you're not over focusing on one or the other. Sometimes the student will answer this question and we'll write a whole essay about this horrible thing that happened and how they struggled with all of this. And then we get to the last paragraph and it's kind of like, oh, and I fixed it, this way. It should be the other way around, lead off and explain, what the difficulty was, and then use the rest of the time to kind of explain, how this, how you grew from this. And again, bring out all of these personal characteristics that you want us to know about you. So in thinking about personal characteristics, let's look at this first example. Example A, the student wrote, I failed grade 11 math because I had a teacher who didn't know how to teach well. I want to study engineering and I know I'll do better with a good teacher. Great. Well, there's some personal characteristics that are definitely coming out here. If I had to kind of pick a few, I would say that, I could tell the student probably doesn't take responsibility for their own actions. Also, maybe they're really bad at math. So not a lot of positive things coming out here. But as I mentioned before, again, it's not, the topic alone, that's a negative thing or a positive thing. It really is having a combination of a good approach and a good topic. So, imagine that this actually happened, of course, during the pandemic and times of conflict, there are things like this that happen. And so, if this actually happened to the student, there's a positive way to talk about it. What if the student had, instead of complaining, had actually tried to put together a study group with other students in the class to kind of help them through this, or maybe start a rapport with the school administration and try and help move through these issues. But again, this approach, not showing off these kind of positive qualities that a good student can take on, is not a great thing. So make sure, even when you're talking about failure or something difficult, that you're framing it in this positive way. And so the second story, the essay B, this is actually from one of our former directors of admission at NYU Abu Dhabi, and this was her essay that she wrote that got her into Yale. So hopefully, not too shabby in terms of an essay. And she wrote, "As I started my final lap in the pool, the entire crowd was cheering, including every other swimmer, all of whom had finished long before me and were grabbing their towels. If I set any records that day, it only could have been for the slowest time. But without my participation, my school could not have even qualified." So let's ask these same questions again about what attributes we learn about this student. So I would say, this student is a team player, even though she wanted to stop swimming, and was maybe a little bit discouraged that she was so slow, she still knew she had to do it so that the team could qualify. So we know that this student really sticks things through and goes to the end, and thinks about team members and has this idea of community. So of course the student didn't say all of these things out loud. They didn't list, these are my attributes. So the story kind of highlights those things, that lets the person reading them kind of understand who the student is from their actions. Another thing I'd like to highlight here is kind of the literary technique that's going on here. There are a couple of things that are happening. One is there's this literary tool of in media res. When you start a story right in the middle of the action, what that does is it kind of instantly puts you in that place and kind of makes you start imagining and seeing what's going on. I'm guessing for a lot of you, when I read that and I talked about the cheering crowd around the pool, you probably imagined a pool in your mind. There's a place, where this writer was able to instantly kind of create a connection in your mind and kind of draw you in personally as a reader. This is something that's really powerful in writing, that can really enable you to make the person who's reading the essay feel like they know you, almost feel like they're having a conversation with you. They kind of imagine having this interaction with you. So when you can, these are great things to do, to be able to really draw your reader in and to make them imagine what's going on. So if you can do this, I really encourage you to do this with storytelling. And I see there's a question that came in about the topic of experience with the war in Ukraine. And again, obviously, I know everyone is going through this right now. And so by all means, feel free to talk about this and to include this. But with the caveat that, all of the other students applying from Ukraine are probably thinking about writing a similar thing. So just make sure if you're addressing the war in Ukraine and you're using this as an essay subject, that you're still doing this in a way that will set yourself apart, and you're telling a story that really will be unique to you. So again, if you can highlight, as you mentioned, those moments where you showed leadership, absolutely do that. Just make sure that to pay extra attention when you're doing that review, to make sure that it's still unique and personal to you, and it's not something that everyone else in your class would have done or also participated in or also experienced. Make sure that it still is sharing your perspective and showing off your abilities. So that was a great question. Thanks for asking that. So for the next example, we have the question, reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking and what was the outcome? So here's another two-parter. This is something that, again, you want to make sure that you're answering both parts, that you're reflecting on this, challenging a belief, but make sure that you're showing your work here. We specifically ask what prompted your thinking and what was the outcome. So a little bit like the failure question before, make sure that you don't write this whole long essay just on challenging a belief or idea and then get to the end and not have told us, why it inspired you and what you did about it. So you don't have to, solve this problem. It can just be challenging a belief or idea. And, in this first example A, we have a student who says, in my culture, a man aims for a good career and a woman should aim for a happy family. I don't think this is fair. So technically, the student has challenged the idea of this kind of, this balance, this gender imbalance, which, again, addresses the question. But this is already in a very simplistic way. Again, we don't expect that the student will say, like, to come up with a successful plan to cure sexism and all of these other things. It doesn't have to be that big of a thing. But make sure that there's some deeper thinking in this, that, you go beyond just saying, okay, this is an unfair situation. Poverty is horrible and I would solve world poverty. These really simplistic kinds of things. Make sure that when you're addressing these, that you really show us, again, what prompted your thinking. It can kind of show us how your brain works and what inspires you, and then what you did about it. So for example, B, we have a student who wrote, growing up, no one even spoke to me about engineering. It didn't seem like an option for a girl. By 10th grade, I'd subscribed to 2 magazines, 5 YouTube channels, and my top Google results were how do you make and how to take apart. By 11th grade, I held our school's first Made by Girls meeting and had 20 elementary school girls bring in clocks to deconstruct. This year, our first meeting had 60 girls. So I think this is a good example of being able to talk about an extracurricular essay or an extracurricular activity in the essay without just repeating things. So probably in the student's application, they wrote that they founded the Made by Girls Club. So we would see that, they're the president that they started this. But this tells us a deeper story. So if we look at this again and try to pull out the attributes of this student, we see that here, we see what the belief or idea was that she challenged, that these STEM fields are don't have a lot of women in them and are male dominated. But then we see what she went on to do, that she immediately kind of found this information herself. She was subscribing to magazines and YouTube channels and kind of really taking everything into her own hands. That she had that intellectual curiosity and really, wanted to challenge that kind of stereotype for herself and to change that. And we also see that this student really has a sense of community. She didn't just end there and say, okay, well, now I know a lot of stuff about, engineering and I'm ready to go on to a STEM field. She wanted to make sure that other girls in her community also were able to challenge this. And so she founded this club. And so this kind of shows us that community engagement, that it wasn't just about this student herself, but she really wanted to make a positive change in her school and her community. So again, this is a really good example for how you can talk about an extracurricular activity, maybe something that you've mentioned in your application, and really give us the full detail there. And again, bring out all of these things that are positive things that you want to show off to admissions. So the last thing I'll talk about today is the school-specific essay. Not every university has this, and in fact, NYU no longer has this essay this year. Again, for accessibility, we really wanted to cut down on the mandatory writing that was required for students to apply. So we have an optional essay in the place of this now, so that you don't have to submit it. But by all means, if you want to share your story, you can use that space. But I would say, many US universities have this question that comes down to why us? So the question is really, why are you applying to this school? Why do you want to attend? And what's really important here is that this has a second question built into it. Kind of the mirror side of it is also, why you? Why are you a good fit for our university? Why is this such a great match? So it's important to think about both of those things and really kind of make an approach that shows the university that you've done your research. You're not just picking this university name because because you saw Taylor Swift give a speech at the last graduation, or that you saw it on a TV show. That you've really done your research and you have motivation and reasons for why you're applying to the university. So it's definitely important to avoid things like this. I'm applying to this school because you're ranked #1 and blah blah blah. Great, we're happy that's important, but we already know we're ranked #1 and blah blah blah, whatever that is. What we want to know is why we're ranked #1 for you. What are the things that you feel like you can't do at any other university, the things that really inspire you and make you excited to apply. So make sure that it really is both sides here. You also want to make sure that you're not just repeating a list of reasons that you've gotten from the website. Sometimes it can be a little bit predictable, a little bit formulaic. If you just take names of professors off the website or classes and say, I want to do this and that, again, at the end, you will end up just telling us things that we already know about us. Definitely don't copy things from the website. I've actually seen that once. Make sure that it is your voice and your reasons, and not just kind of repeating things that we already know about our institution. It really is about that match on both sides. And I think this second example here, so again, this is an actual example of an essay that a student wrote. I think this does a really good job of showing and not telling. So really letting us know that the student has done their research, and without kind of specifically spelling out things or kind of dropping in names or classes. So this student said, my high school history teacher taught us about the Cold War by sharing his experience of living in post-Soviet Russia. He taught us about European history by talking about his experience living in Paris. We learned about art history by hearing about the museums he had visited in Florence. I was in awe of the way he had learned about the world. And now NYUAD is my chance to do this. I want to learn about Ethiopia through a roommate from Addis Ababa. I want to learn about China through a J-term class in Shanghai. I want to learn about the marine environment while kayaking through the mangroves in Abu Dhabi. So what the student has done here is, in the very beginning, setting up and talking about being amazed by her high school teacher who, actually got out into the world and visited these places. She's telling us that she knows that this is really important for NYU too. We're the opposite of the Zoom university. We're the university that wants to get you out into the world, get you to these cities to, really feel these places, see these things for yourself. That, these firsthand experiences, experiential learning is really important for us. So at the very beginning, she kind of set up and said, okay, this is what I'm going to be able to do. And this is the kind of education that I want. And then instead of just listing off, like, I know you have a student population with students from 120 different countries and no majority from any part of the world. She just said, she wanted to learn about Ethiopia from having a roommate from Addis Ababa. So just saying, I know that because of this diversity, it's very likely that my roommates will be from like the 3 opposite corners of the world from me. Also mentioning that, she didn't say that, I know students, get to do a lot of study abroad and that's really important, but just mentioned, that she knows she's done her research. She knows that we have January term classes, which are 3-week periods at the end of, January, obviously. But this, these shorter term classes where students get to spend time at other academic centers around the world. And that's a really part of the kind of study away component. And also as kind of a wink, she said she wanted to learn about the marine environment while kayaking through the mangroves in Abu Dhabi. I think for most people, when they hear Abu Dhabi, they either think like steel and glass high-rise, super modern kind of city, or they think like deserts and camels and palm trees, which, I mean, it's both. It's a combination of these things. But fewer people know that there are actually like national parks that are within the city of mangroves, where you can go and rent kayaks and kind of just go out and be in the middle of this kind of calm, serene nature while still being in the city. So that was really a wink to us to say that, I've really done my research. I know what this place is like. So if you can do this is a really great thing. And I also encourage students to kind of take yourself on a virtual tour of the university and kind of think about these things and how you would fit into the place. This can really serve to strengthen your application and let the university know that you've done your research and that you're not just, again, just kind of randomly picking this university, but because it's something that's important to you. So that's the end of my presentation, the end of my slide deck. I'll open up the floor for questions in a bit, but before I do that, I just wanted to leave my contact information here. I'll also put a link in the chat if that's possible, but you can also scan this QR code. So if you complete that form, it will send you an automatic email directly from me. So you'll have my contact information, also the links to the application process, PDF brochures, videos, the opportunity to connect with current NYU Abu Dhabi students from Ukraine, all of those kinds of things. So if this is something that has excited you today, this is something that you feel like you want to undertake, I'm absolutely here for you to help you through this process. Please don't hesitate to touch base with me. So with that said, I will go ahead and again open up the floor for questions. And also, Oksana, if you have any comments as well, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Justin. It was just amazing presentation and workshop. And thank you for these unique examples, because usually we have the same questions all the time: how to write, what to include, how should I write the sentences, too complicated or just like complex or like this. So thank you so much. And for those viewers who are right now with us, I would like also to announce the information that you will have an opportunity to see and meet Justin one more time in November, because we are going to organize an undergraduate boot camp for you guys, and there you will get to know a lot of information, useful information, and you will have a chance to ask questions directly. So if you are interested in that, you can follow our pages on Instagram and Instagram and Facebook, and we will announce all the information there. And one more announcement for everyone. We are going to have EducationUSA Fair on the November the 5th. So if you are interested and would like to communicate and talk to different universities, you can also register and join this fair. It starts from 11 a.m. and will be till 5 p.m., so like the whole day. And we will share the link also in the comments, I think, in YouTube. Yeah, so if you are interested, just follow this link, register, and you will have notification when to join and what to do there. It's very useful, and you will meet about 40 or 50 representatives from different universities. So you're always welcome. And for now, thanks everyone for joining. If you have any questions or comments a bit later, you can contact EducationUSA Ukraine, and we will contact Justin with those questions. Thank you, Justin, one more time for this wonderful presentation. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We have also comment. Thank you, Justin, for sharing this information, and EducationUSA for this opportunity. Thank you, guys, for watching us. Have a good evening, and see you next week.
Thank you again. Bye.